We're on Daf Tzadi Heyamid Beis, towards the bottom of the Daf. And the last thing we discussed, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up before the end of the Daf. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Yosef. Shmuel is quoted as paskening halacha like Rabbi Yosef. Now, we have two versions of Rabbi Yosef. We have the version of Rabbi Ami, and we have the version of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. And the issue of Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha regarding Rabbi Yossi is the question of a distinction between Arusa and a Nesua. Remember that there are two marriages and two people go out to Medina Sayyam, 2 of the 4. We have Rachel, Eshes Avram, goes out to Medina Sayyam, and we have Yitzchak, the Baal of Leah, Rachel's sister, who goes out to Medina Sayyam, and one witness testifies that they both died. Now we find out they're both alive. And we have 2 questions, 2 issues. Number 1, whether or not Avram could resume his marriage with Rachel, having now been married. Well, I don't know if I mentioned this. Well, after the 8 testified, then I'll get into it, don't worry. Then Avram married Leah. Okay. So we have 2 issues now. Number 1 is whether Avram, after we find out that Rachel is still alive, can resume his marriage with Rachel. And the other issue is whether or not Leah can resume her marriage with Yitzchak. Now, according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, I'm going to start backwards. According to his version of Rabbi Yossi, he was the last version that we had. Rabbi Yossi is going to distinguish between Eritzin and Nisun. Let me just make sure I got that right. I had a I think I left it home. I had a chart that I wanted to show you that summarized. Okay, fine. We'll manage without the chart. Okay. Right. So according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, there's a distinction between Erisin and Nisun in the following context. What was the marriage relationship like between Avram and Rachel before she went out to Medina Sayyam? Was it Nisuin or was it Erisin? In the case of Erisin, Rabbi Yossi argues, again, this is all Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Rabbi Yossi argues that we have to be very mach. Why? Because the key of keys here in this entire chalent is whether or not we recognize the marriage between Avram and Leah. If the marriage between Avram and Rachel was only Erisin, then we have a tremendous push to recognize the marriage between Avram and Leah. Why is that? Because Tnai Velonis Kayama Tnai. In the case of Erison, the spectator witnessing Avram marrying Leah will say that Rachel was never married to Avram because the Erison was null and void by the fact that there was Bitlat Tnai. Again, we don't know that there was any Tnai. In fact, there wasn't any Tnai in reality between Avram and Rachel. But we might say, well, there must have been a Tnai in that marriage because otherwise, why is Avram Baila Shel Rachel marrying Leah, who's his sister? Once we assume a Tnai and we recognize that marriage, then the status of Rachel, when she turns out to be alive and well, is achos grushasa. Why? Because once we recognize the marriage between Avram and Leah, we're going to have to require Avram to deliver a get to Leah. Thus, Rachel becomes achos grushasa. Again, all this is derabanan, but nevertheless, it's an erva derabanan of achos grushasa. That's going to have an impact, says Rabbi Yossi, on the marriage relationship between Yitzchak and Leah, because now Leah turns out to be Grushaso Liachar Shenisex, meaning Yitzchak's wife Leah was divorced from Yitzchak, again in the eyes of the spectator, and that's why Avram was able to marry Leah. Now, in the context of recognizing that marriage, Avram will have to deliver a get to Leah. Leah is now Yitzchak's wife, who was divorced from Yitzchak, again in the eyes of the spectator, and now is married to another man who now divorced. So that's called Masechet Yevamot. So according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Rabbi Yossi is going to be machmir, and he's going to say, well, the same yardstick that you apply to Achosa, you have to apply to Gisa, to the brother-in-law, to Yitzchak. And if you're going to say that Avram cannot resume his marriage relationship with Rachel because we're recognizing, in quotation marks, the marriage between Avram and Leah, requiring a get thereof, and that's why there's no possibility of being mater achosa because achos kushasa, then by the same token, we should apply the same yardstick, and therefore we cannot allow Giso, which means Yitzchak, to resume his marriage relationship with Leah. It's all, in Yiddish we say verbunden. Verbunden means it's all connected one to the other. That was the view of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha in Rabbi Yossi. Now we go back to Rabbi Ami, the first version or understanding of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Ami, said the following, that we should differentiate between Alpi Bezdin, which means there was only one aid that testified about the Misa, the Posel al Yidei Acherim, Posel al Yidei Atzmo, but Alpi Eidim, if there were two Eidim, Eino Posel al Yidei Acherim, Eino Posel al Yidei Atzmo. So according to Rabbi Yossi, in Rabbi Ami's presentation, Rabbi Yossi, the distinction here is between Eid Echad and Shnei Eidim, whereas according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, the distinction is between Arusa and Nesua. Let's go over that last point. According to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, in the case of Nesua, where Avram took his wife Rachel from Erisin into Nisuin into the Chuppah, then the spectator is going to come to the conclusion that there was never a valid marriage between Avram and Leah, because they can't say that there was a t'nai in the marriage of Rachel to Avram, because Rachel was a full-fledged Nisuin. There's no t'nai in Nisuin. And therefore, the entire marriage between Avram and Sarah was based on toes, just simply because they were mistakenly under the impression that Rachel had died. So therefore, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka in the case of Nesua, he's not bound with, you should apply the same yardstick to the Achosod and also to the Giso, because even in the case of Achosod, we're going to allow Avram to resume his relationship with Achosod. But if we're going with Rav Ami's understanding of Rabbi Yossi, and he only accepts the distinction between Eid Echad and Shnei Eidim, he's not accepting the distinction between an Arusa and Nesua. Therefore, even in the case of an Nesua, Rabbi Yossi is going to be Machmir and apply the same yardstick to both Ishto and Achoso, these two marriages, based on the fact that she, meaning Leah, relied on the testimony of one aide, and she had no right to do so without being absolutely certain and convinced, Bivados, that her husband Yitzchak was in fact dead. And therefore, we have to impose a knas, as we discussed yesterday, and that's going to bust up the marriage between Yitzchak when he returns alive and Leah, because Leah was at fault over here. And Rabbi Yossi is going to be consistent. Once you're busting up that marriage, we're going to apply the same yardstick to Achosa. Now that leads us to the following issue. Well, which Rabbi Yossi? Is it Rabbi Yossi in the version of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, or is it Rabbi Yossi in the version of Rabbi Ami? The Gemara now assumes, I'm not sure exactly why, but the Gemara, it's a toss-up. So the Gemara assumes now that Shmuel is going to paskin halachic Rabbi Yossi based on the version of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. And we're going to differentiate between an Arusa and an Isua. So in the case of Baal Harusa, that means that Rachel was an Arusa, and then her husband Avram, based on testimony, married Leah, her sister. In such a case, we're afraid that the spectator will say that there was a t'nai in the Erisin, and therefore they will validate the marriage again in their minds, validate the marriage between Avram and Leah, because Leah is not a chosishta, because Rachel is not ishta, because it was a t'nai and the t'nai was never mekuya. Is maskif lo Rav Yosef? Rav Yosef now is going to reveal to us that Shmuel is contradicting himself. On the one hand, Shmuel is quoted as saying that he paskins halacha ki Rav Yossi, and we're going to assume it's Rav Yitzchak Nafta's version of Rav Yossi, and Rav Yossi is going to be machmir in both marriages, to bust up both marriages. If there was an erisin between Avram and Rachel, and now Rav Yosef is going to quote another statement of Shmuel in which he paskins lekula, and that cannot be reconciled l'chora with his psak like Rav Yosef. By Itmar, where do we find Shmuel in a machlokus between Rav and Shmuel? What's the case? Yevamot There's a machlok between Rav and Shmuel and Yevamot. Rav Omar Rei Keshes Ish, Shmuel Omar Ena Keshes Ish. What's this all about? Omar Avhuna, Kigon. The case is the following. This is the case of the debate between Rav and Shmuel. Kigon Shekidish Achives Ha'isha. Shimon's brother Ruvain was Makadesh, a woman. There was only Kiddush. After Ruvain was Makadesh, a woman. Ruvain, went out took a slow boat to China. Vishama and Shimon hears, let's say one witness testifies, Shemeis Achiv, that tragically Ruvain out there in China got hit in the head by a bat, and I don't know if it was a baseball bat or a flying bat, and he died. That was the testimony of an Eid Echad, which means that Ruvain's wife faults for Yibam to Shimon. Shimon was Makayim the mitzvah of Yibam, and he took his late brother, thinking he was his late brother's wife as a wife. And now Shimon's wife, the Yevamah, her husband, Ruvain, shows up alive and well. He survived the bat. Which means that Shimon was married to Ashes Achiv, who was an Ashes Ish, because his brother Ruvain, in fact, was alive and well. There wasn't a mitzvah of Yibam. It was a double aver of Bias Ashes Ish and Bias Ashes Achiv. Rav Omar Harehi Keshes Ish V'asura Liyavam. Now, what is Asura Liyavam? Just 1 second. There's another piece of the puzzle here. And I'm missing. Just 1 second. Who is here? Asura Liyavam is what? Is we're talking about Ruvain or we're talking about Shimon? I think we're talking about Ruvain. Why is he called a Yavam? That I don't understand.
Because he's the brother of the new husband. She's considered married to the second guy, and so when the first guy returns, he's now the Yavam.
Her first husband is called the Yavam? Why is he called the Yavam? I'm missing.
Because he's the Yavam to the second husband, because he's the brother of the second husband.
I mean, the second husband is alive, or he died also? Do we know that he died? No, he didn't die. Shimon didn't die. But Reuven is called the Yavam of Shimon. All right, I'll buy that. I mean, I don't have a better shot.
The footnote in Rabbi ArtScroll.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to read the footnote in Masechet, and then you, Don, you're in charge of reading out loud for us the ArtScroll. Here he says, Chav Beis, Kol Ach Habal Nikra Yevamot. Just 1 second. I think he's saying the same thing as you, but I'm not sure how to read this. Oh, I see. He adds a little bit of an extra twist to it. He says that according to Rav, we're going to recognize the marriage between Ashes, Reuven, and Shimon. Why are we recognizing that marriage? After all, Shimon is marrying his live brother's wife. But the answer is because the marriage relationship between this woman and Reuven was Erison. And we can always assume in the eyes of the spectator that the Erison was al Tanai and the Tanai was not Mekuyim. Okay, Don, you want to read to me the footnote in article, please? Because I don't have an article. I have an article somewhere, but I don't know where it is. I haven't seen it.
It's very long.
Oh, it's very long.
Yeah.
Can you read just part of it? Maybe just the first.
Just read the first paragraph. The Yavam refers to the woman's first husband, who as brother of her present husband is potentially her Yavam with respect to her present marriage. And quoting Rashi and
okay, it's pretty much the same. I think that the Masechet just maybe I didn't see the rest of the footnote, so this is not a judgment on article. But I think
the second paragraph goes on to explain Irushim and Kedushim, but it's a long paragraph. So.
Yeah, no. I'm just saying that in terms of the name Yavam, right? It says here, Basura Yavam. Just the use of the term. This is just a study in etymology. The dictionary definition of the word Yavam in this context, as referring to the first husband, why is he called the Yavam? The Masechet adds another little twist to it. And that is because Rav Shita of Harei Keshes Ish means that we're recognizing the marriage between Ashes, Reuven, and Shimon on a D'Rabbanan level. It's all D'Rabbanan, obviously. And why are we recognizing that marriage? Because we believe that Reuven was never married to his wife. And there are no sisters over here in this case of Rav and Shmuel. We're talking about one woman and two brothers. To whom is she married? We're going to consider it as if she's married to the second brother, Shimon, and that's why we call Reuven the Yavam, because in the context of recognizing the marriage to Shimon, if Chas v'Shalom Shimon dies without children, then she falls to Yibum, to Reuven. So Reuven is called here in this context the Yavam. And all this is based on the distinction between an Arusa and a Sua and Rav's Chumra over here, Harei Keshes Ish, which means that she cannot resume her marriage relationship with her husband. It's based on the fact that the spectator thinks that the second marriage, meaning the marriage to Shimon, was valid because she was never married to Reuven, the first brother, because there was a Tanai and the Tanai was not Makim. Shmuel Amar, Eino Ke'eshes Ish, V'sharyaleh. She'll go back to her first husband. I mean, Reuven unfortunately went out to Medina Sayyam. He got hit by a bat, and they mistakenly took him for dead. They wrote an obituary in the newspaper. You know the famous story about two brothers, and they were twins, and this happened a long time ago, and they mistakenly identified the body as Reuven when it was really Shimon who died. Anyway, he calls him up, and he's, the one who's alive. And I didn't get the story straight. Sorry, I messed up the joke. Anyway, the two people and their friends, one of them was written up as an obituary as if he had died when it was really his brother who had died. So anyway, he calls up his friend. So his friend immediately says, "Where are you calling from?" Here, in this case, according to Shmuel, we're not going to bust up the marriage because he went to Medina Sayyam and they mistakenly took him for dead. He's alive and well. The marriage is still valid. The Sharia. But now Shmuel is the one who allows the marriage to be reinstated. If she resumes her relationship with her husband. So Shmuel is obviously being making, and he's oblivious to the whole structure of Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafta, that Rabbi Yossi is worried about a case of an arusa, and she's asura on the gis, on the brother-in-law in Rabbi Yossi's frame of reference, because there was an erison relationship between Avram and Rachel. Hence, Rabbi Yosef says there's a stira here, a contradiction between two statements of Shmuel. Amalei Abaye, Abai turns to Rabbi Yosef to try to reconcile this contradiction. Why? Who whispered into your ear? Who says that when Shmuel paskin like Rabbi Yossi, he was accepting the version of Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka to differentiate between an Arutz and a Nesuin? Dilma ad Rabbi Amikom. Maybe Shmuel was accepting Rabbi Yossi in the light of Rabbi Ami's interpretation of Rabbi Yossi, no distinction between an Arutza and a Nesua, but rather we're going to distinguish between Eid Echad and Shnei Eidim. So I'm just going to read here the Masifti says, Shem al divrei Rabbi Ami b'bir das Rabbi Yossi Omar Shmuel shalocha k'divrei Rabbi Yossi ulidvarav lo Omar Rabbi Yossi she'ein lachush she'yomru she'atnai b'kedushin klal. 1 second. There's so many negatives. The Dvarav lo Omar Rabbi Yossi she'ein lachush she'yomru she'haya t'nai b'kedush kasharei l'dvarav bir divrei Rabbi Yossi she'afilu b'nisei al pi eid echad she'meisu ba'ala v'achosa asur l'achso l'bayla. In the case of eid echad, Boseres afis achosa l'bayla below dafka b'kidesh, Baresha eno choshesh l'tna. So let me tell you what I understand here, and then I'll tell you what I don't understand. What I understand is that Rabbi Ami, in his version of Rabbi Yossi, does not distinguish between an Arutz and a Nesua. And that could justify Shmuel, who likewise rejects that distinction between an Arusa and a Nesua, because Shmuel, in the case of an Arusa, which was exactly the case that Rav says was Asur, Shmuel says Shari Lechi's Muteris. So this whole chashash about the spectator saying that there was a Tanai in the Kedushin, that's completely rejected by Shmuel. And that's completely rejected by Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Ami's version of Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Ami, in his transmission of Rabbi Yossi, did not differentiate between an Arus and a Nesuin. Well, what was critical was whether or not we have a Knas, because there was one aid, or we have no Knas, and there's perfect, we can vindicate any sort of guilt over here because they relied on two aidim. But the distinction between Nesua and Arusa and the chash that maybe the spectator will say we have to recognize marriage because the spectator thinks that the original marriage to Rachel was al Tanai and that Tanai was not Mekuyim, all that is out of the picture. It has no relevance and no halachic significance according to Rabbi Yossi. And in that sense, Shmuel is consistent by passing like Rabbi Yossi and arguing against Rav, rejecting Rav's chashash in the case of Erisin, that maybe there's a Tanai, etc., etc. That much I understand. Here's where I get lost. The bottom line is that according to Rabbi Yossi, we will bust up these marriages. There's going to be an Isur, according to Rabbi Yossi, of Rachel resuming her relationship with Avram, and Leah resuming her relationship with Yitzchak. For a different reason, albeit. Not for the reason of Tnai Be'erison, because again, according to Rabbi Ami's version of Rabbi Yossi, there's no difference between Erison and Nesuin, but for the reason of Knas, of relying on the testimony of one aid, which was a no-no. Unless Daiku Mitzvah, unless she did her due diligence and checked out and examined, did a thorough investigation. Shmuel is saying that Reuven can resume his relationship with his wife, Sharilah, despite the fact that she had a relationship with his brother, Shimon, which is an Ish relationship. And presumably they relied on one witness. Now, how do I know they relied on one witness? That I don't know. Let's see. Itmar, Yevamot, Rav Omar, Omar Avhuna, Kigon Tekidech Achiv V'Sa'isha, V'holach Lo B'dina Sayam V'Shama, V'Shama, Rashi says, Mi Eid Echad, so there's only one aid. So the conclusion is that according to Rav Yossi, in Rav Yami's version, we make no distinction between Rachel being an Arusa, Rachel being a Nesua, and in both cases, since they relied illegally, so to speak, I mean, they got to head to business, but illegally, meaning with the Shia, with the negligence, they relied on one aid, and therefore there's going to be an Isra on both. So how do we reconcile Shmuel with his psak halach like Rabbi Yossi? And that's going to be an issue that Rashi is going to address it. But before we get to analyze Rashi, we have to keep in mind that the bottom line of halacha here of Shmuel is not the bottom line of Rabbi Yossi. They're not saying the same thing. Rabbi Yossi is being machmir. It's an isur. Whereas Shmuel is saying Sharilah, it's mutter. Just go back to Rav Ami for a second. U'ka'amar Rav Yossi, that Alpi Bezdin, Posel al Yidei Acherim, Posel al Yidei Atzmo. That's again Shmuel, who's paskening in the case of a woman, a married woman, who assumes that her husband died, marries his brother, and then finds out that her husband is alive, she's allowed to resume her relationship with her husband. How is that so? I mean, what happened to the Knatz? I mean, we're talking about an Eid Echad situation of Itiru Bezdin. And here I have footnote number Chavtal in the Masechet says, "V'afal gav diladas Rabbi Yossi." Isha, Eshes Gisa. Right, we're talking about Leah. Shenisa lo bitos. She got married to Ruvain. I'm sorry, to what was his name? To Avraham bitos. Al pi Eid Echad, based on the testimony of Eid Echad that Yitzchak had died. Asura lachzo lebayla. She cannot resume her relation with her husband, Yitzchak. The afchelo shayach lomar shenis garshemi bayla v'nisa kidasheni kidin. We can't hold this whole thing that they validate the marriage between Avram and Leah, because of a Tnai b'Erisim. So all that is out. V'ilu l'Shmuel, ishto shenis yavmo li'achiv, a woman, Eshes Reuben, that got married to Shimon mistakenly, is muteres lachzo lebayla. Mishum shein lomar boshen nisoli ach baylo beheter. This be a Rashi, so he has now a summary of Rashi. Shebi Eshes Giso. Okay, that's back to Yitzchak and Leah. Choshash Rav Yossi shemi yavo latira lachso lebayla gam kisheba hagis mivedinas hayom levado bitchila. The offense yesh lesor eshes giso lachso lebayla lahatzrich osa get bimishin nisalo sheyesh lachush sheyomru shemesach osa b'medinas hayam v'nisal lebal hachos kidasu kidid mishum shenis garsha mi bayla. Yotzeis Mibal Achosa below get, Yom Sheshisish Yotze below get. So he's introducing another element into the equation, which we mentioned a few days ago, that it's quite possible, again, in the eyes of the spectator, that before Rachel went out to Medina Sayyam, her husband Avram had delivered her a get. And that's why the marriage between Avram and Leah is a valid marriage, because at the point that he married, just one second. That's not good enough, because she's still a Chos Ishto. This says Lavala Chos Kedin, Mishum Shenis Garsha Mipaila. What does that mean, Kedin? Yotzeis Mibala Chosa Below Get, Yomusha Ashes Ish Yotze Below Get. Oh, I see. The spectator is going to assume that Rachel died in Medina Sayyam, and now she got married to, right? And now her husband, the widower, right, married her sister Leah, and that's Kedasu Kedin. So if they're assuming that Rachel died, and again, that makes no difference whether she was an Arusa or a Nesua, then we're going to have to validate the marriage between Avram and Leah, because she's no longer an erva of Achos Ishto. Achos Ishto is only during the life of your wife. Now she's gone. So once the spectator recognizes the validity of the marriage between Avram and Leah, we're going to have to require a get. And once we require a get, meaning that Avram has to deliver a get to Leah, now Rabbi Yossi draws the logical conclusion that we cannot allow the marriage between Leah and Yitzchak to resume, because now it looks like he's marrying Grushas Liachar Shenisis. Again, the Rabbi Yossi Chumrah, in which he busts up the marriage, so to speak, between Yitzchak and Leah, is all based on the fact that Leah is the sister of Rachel, and the onlooker, when he sees Avram marrying Leah, assumes that Rachel must have died in Medina Sayyam, and that marriage is valid. So therefore, we're going to be Machayev, Avram, to give a get to Leah. So the entire Chumrah of Rabbi Yossi to bust up the marriage between Yitzchak and Leah is based on the fact that we're going to recognize the marriage between Avram and Leah and require a get. But however, in the case of Shmuel, in his machlokas against Rav, Shaholach Abal Medina Sayyam, so she, the wife of Ruvain, after Ruvain, they testified that he died, she fell for Yibum to Shimon. Shimon was Miyamimar. Ein chashash sheyomru shenisa li'achiv kidin. We're not going to assume. Look, what would possibly be the heter in the eyes of the spectator for Shimon to be married to Ruvain's wife if Ruvain is alive? I mean, they see Ruvain alive. So he didn't tell me Ruvain gave a get to his wife. That doesn't change the law at Kiyuzeh, because she's still Eishes Achi. Everybody understands that the marriage, so-called Yibum, between Shimon and Eishes Ruvain was betos. And therefore, she can resume her marriage with Ruvain when Ruvain comes back to her. Brilliant. That's Rashi. Let's just make a note of where we got to. We're up to the Enam. On the very, very tippy bottom of Tzadihei Amid Beis. So we covered today how many lines of Gemara? Maybe, I don't know, 5 lines of Gemara, 6 lines, 7 lines of Gemara. But we did a good job. Some of the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit into place. Don't ask me how you can learn this daf in a daf yomi scenario. It's physically impossible. The intricacies of this sugya, 2 versions of Rabbi Yossi, a Steer and Shmuel, and how to offer different possible reconciliations of the 2 steers, the Steer and Shmuel. I mean, that requires a great deal of thought and analysis. All right, anyway, have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.